The machines had gone silent. For the first time in decades, the factory floor, once pulsing with movement, voices, and the steady hum of production, was still. Maria stood in the middle of it, staring at the empty workstations, the dust settling over conveyor belts that would never run again. Her grandfather had worked here. So had her father. She had spent 30 years of her life walking these same paths, clocking in before sunrise, walking out long after sunset. She knew this place better than she knew herself. Now? It was gone. She glanced toward the bulletin board in the break room, where a list of names had been posted, employees who had accepted relocation offers to the Tennessee plant. Most of them were younger. No mortgages. No aging parents. No roots in a town that was dying. Maria swallowed hard. Where does that leave me? Behind her, the factory manager Rick Dawson cleared his throat. She hadn't even noticed him walking up. Maria, he said, voice forced with artificial sympathy. She turned, arms crossed. She already knew what was coming. Rick hesitated, then held up a folder. Severance paperwork. We're finalizing the transition, he continued, as if this were a routine HR meeting. Relocation offers are closing by the end of the week. If you're interested, I can. I'm not interested, Maria cut in. Rick shifted, uncomfortable. Look, I know this isn't easy, but... She scoffed. You don't know anything. A flicker of frustration crossed his face, like he was tired of these conversations. But she didn't care. You've got experience, he tried again. That's more than a lot of people here. If you take the transfer, you can. Start over at 52? Maria snapped. For less money? In a right-to-work state where the union has no pull? Where my mother has no doctor, no caretaker? She shook her head. I'm not uprooting my entire life for scraps, Rick. Rick sighed. Then you know what that means. She did know. The severance money would run out. Unemployment checks wouldn't cover the mortgage. And at her age, with no college degree, the job market wasn't exactly welcoming. But what choice did she have? Maria snatched the folder from his hand, tucking it under her arm. I'll figure it out, she muttered. Rick exhaled, rubbing his temple. I hope you do, Maria. I really do. But they both knew hope didn't pay bills. Maria drove home in silence. The town was dying. She could see it in every empty storefront, every for sale sign planted in front yards. People were leaving because they had no choice. The ones who stayed behind? They were just trying to survive. She turned onto her street and pulled into the driveway of the house she had fought to keep after her divorce. The house where she had raised her son. The house where her mother was slowly forgetting everything. Maria took a deep breath, gripping the steering wheel before forcing herself to step inside. The scent of burnt toast hit her immediately. Her stomach twisted. She rushed into the kitchen and found her mother standing by the stove, looking lost. The toaster was still plugged in, still burning. Smoke curled from the blackened bread. Ma. Maria hurried over, yanking the plug out of the wall. Her mother flinched. I was making breakfast. Maria turned to her, her heart pounding. It's 5 p.m., Ma. Elena blinked, eyes darting to the dark window above the sink, confusion washing over her face. Maria swallowed hard. Another episode. It was getting worse. She guided Elena to the kitchen table, sitting her down gently. You okay? Her mother exhaled shakily, rubbing her temples. I thought it was morning. I wanted to have everything ready before you left for work. Maria forced a smile. I appreciate that, Ma. But inside? She was breaking. She turned away to grab a dish towel, hiding the way her hands shook. What happens when I can't leave her alone anymore? She glanced at the stack of medical bills on the counter, the unopened severance packet still tucked under her arm. There wasn't enough money. Not for in-home care. Not for a nursing home. And now, there wasn't even a paycheck. Maria gritted her teeth. She couldn't fall apart. Not now. Instead, she grabbed a plate from the cabinet and placed a fresh piece of bread on it, setting it in front of her mother. "We'll eat together," she said softly. Elena smiled, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside her daughter. That night, after putting her mother to bed, Maria sat at the kitchen table with a calculator, a notepad, and a glass of whiskey. She ran the numbers. Again. She adjusted them, cut things down, moved money around, and it still didn't work. No matter how she tried to rearrange her expenses, the truth didn't change. She was running out of time. She could take the relocation package, but that meant leaving her mother behind, forcing her into a care facility she couldn't afford. She could stay and find another job, but what job? She had spent 30 years working with her hands, managing machines, not sitting at a desk. No one was hiring people like her. She took a slow sip of her drink, staring at the mortgage statement. What if I lose the house? The thought made her sick. Maria closed her eyes. She wasn't just losing a job. She was losing everything. And for the first time in her life, Maria didn't have a plan. Maria woke up to the sound of her mother moving around in the kitchen, again. She bolted upright, heart racing, half expecting to smell smoke. Instead, she found Elena pouring coffee into an empty cereal bowl, staring at it in confusion. Maria exhaled, rubbing her face. "Ma, that's not a mug." Elena blinked at the bowl, then chuckled softly. "Oh. Well, that explains why it looked funny." She laughed like it was nothing. Like her own mind wasn't slipping away. Maria forced a smile even as her chest tightened. "Come on," she said gently, taking the bowl and replacing it with an actual mug. "Let's sit." She poured them both coffee, stirring in sugar out of habit. Elena took a sip and sighed contentedly. "So, are you heading to work soon?" Maria's stomach twisted. She had been laid off 2 weeks ago, but Elena couldn't remember. Maria couldn't bring herself to tell her again. So instead, she just said, "Not today." Elena nodded, completely unaware that her daughter was sitting across from her, drowning. That afternoon, Maria went to the community support office, a place she had never stepped foot into before. It felt like failure just being there. A woman named Brenda, mid-40s with tired eyes, sat behind a desk, flipping through forms. "Since you were laid off, you qualify for unemployment," Brenda said, not unkindly. "It won't be much, but it'll help." Maria already knew it wouldn't be enough. "And for your mother," Brenda continued, "there are state-funded caregiving resources, but, well, the wait list is long." Maria scoffed. "How long?" Brenda hesitated. 12 to 18 months. Maria let out a hollow laugh. "My mother doesn't have 12 to 18 months for me to figure this out." Brenda sighed. "I know. The system isn't built for," she stopped herself, but Maria knew what she was about to say. It wasn't built for people like her. People who had worked their whole lives but didn't have the luxury of retiring, relocating, or relying on someone else's paycheck. Maria pushed back her chair, ready to leave, when something caught her eye. A flyer pinned to the bulletin board behind Brenda's desk. "Workforce Support Group, Jobs for Older Workers." Maria narrowed her eyes. "That's still a thing?" she asked, nodding toward it. Brenda glanced over her shoulder. "Yeah. Wednesdays at the rec center. Mostly factory workers trying to figure out what's next." Maria hesitated. She didn't want to sit in a room full of people talking about how screwed they all were. But what other option did she have? The rec center basement smelled like burnt coffee and cheap carpet cleaner. Maria sat near the back, arms crossed, watching. People like her sat in folding chairs, men and women in their 50s and 60s, laid off, discarded, trying to find a path that didn't exist anymore. Then, a voice caught her attention. Teresa. Maria hadn't seen her in months. She had been a quality control specialist at the plant, sharp, quick-witted, no nonsense. Now, she looked exhausted. My dad needs round-the-clock care, Teresa was saying, rubbing her temples. I can't work full-time because of him, but if I don't work, we don't eat. So tell me, what the hell am I supposed to do? Maria stiffened. It was like hearing her own thoughts out loud. Another woman sighed. I spent 20 years managing teams, and now companies tell me I don't have the right leadership skills for an office job? A man in his late 50s scoffed. Tried applying to auto shops. They don't want me. Say I'm too old school. Maria's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. They weren't just struggling. They were being erased. She glanced at Teresa again. I don't need another factory job. Maria sat forward. Neither do I. She took a breath. And for the first time since she lost her job, an idea started to take shape. Maria sat in that meeting, heart pounding. The words had left her mouth before she even had time to process them. Neither do I. And now? All eyes were on her. She hadn't planned to speak. She hadn't planned to do anything. But now, with Teresa looking at her, really looking at her, Maria knew she couldn't just sit back. She took a breath. We all know what's happening, she said. The factory is gone. The jobs aren't coming back. And even if they were, they wouldn't be for us. We're not the ones companies are hiring anymore. Murmurs. Nods. Maria's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. But here's the thing, she continued. Every single one of us in this room has spent decades doing hard work, physical, skilled, real work. We know how to fix things. We know how to manage people. We know how to solve problems. She glanced at Teresa. And a lot of us, we're caregivers now, too. Not by choice. Not because we planned it. But because that's where life took us. Teresa swallowed, eyes flicking downward. Maria sat forward. What if we stopped trying to find a job in a system that doesn't want us? What if we built something for ourselves? The room went silent. Maria hesitated, pulse racing. A caregiving service, she pressed on. Not some corporate-run agency where the workers make minimum wage while executives rake in the profits. A cooperative. Something run by people like us, for people like us. Families need affordable care. We need work that pays fairly and gives us flexibility. We could make that happen. Teresa narrowed her eyes, considering. Like, our own business? Not just a business, Maria clarified. A worker-owned cooperative. No CEO cutting our paychecks. We own it, we run it, we split the profits. The skepticism in the room was thick. You ever run a business before? Someone asked. Maria shook her head. No. But I spent 30 years running a factory line, organizing shifts, training workers. That's management. That's problem solving. And we're not doing this alone. She turned to Teresa. If I figure out the legal side, the funding, would you help build this with me? Teresa studied her. Then, slowly, she nodded. I'm in. That night, Maria sat at her kitchen table, wide awake. The coffee had long since gone cold. The calculator, covered in numbers that still didn't make sense, sat beside her laptop, which was open to government websites about worker-owned businesses. Her notebook was filled with frantic scribbles. LLC or nonprofit? Licensing? State regulations? Startup costs? She didn't know where to start. She just knew she had to. Maria clicked on an article about a caregiving cooperative in another state. Women just like her had built something from nothing. So why couldn't she? She glanced at the clock. 2:17 a.m. She should sleep. Instead, she kept reading. Because for the first time in a long time, she had a reason to keep going. Maria spent the next week learning more than she had in the past 30 years. She woke up before dawn, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table, drowning in legal paperwork, business grants, and startup guides. It was overwhelming. Terrifying, even. She had spent her entire life following orders, working under someone else's system. Now, she was trying to build her own, from scratch. And every time doubt crept in, she reminded herself, if I don't do this, I lose everything. At their next meeting, Maria and Teresa sat in the rec center basement with a group of former factory workers. 12 people. All of them desperate for a way forward. Maria laid it out for them. There are grants for worker-owned businesses, loans, state funding. We can get licensed as a home care cooperative. It won't be easy, but it's possible. Skepticism filled the room. A man in his late 50s, Greg, shook his head. I don't know, Maria. We're factory people, not business owners. Maria met his eyes. Then let's stop thinking like factory workers and start thinking like builders. Greg hesitated. Then Teresa spoke. She's right, she said firmly. We built cars, managed teams, handled logistics. We know how to work. What we don't know, we can learn. Silence. Then, slowly, heads nodded. They were in. Getting licensed as a home care provider was a nightmare. Maria and Teresa spent hours in government offices, filling out forms, meeting with business consultants who spoke in circles. One official told them worker-owned businesses were too complicated to qualify for small business loans. Another said they needed years of experience in the care industry before they could apply for funding. Maria clenched her fists. So you're telling me we can't get experience because we don't have experience? The woman behind the desk just shrugged. Maria stormed out. Teresa followed, shaking her head. Unbelievable. Maria exhaled sharply. They don't want people like us to succeed. Teresa crossed her arms. Then we'll make them notice us. When they approached local care centers to partner with them, they were laughed at. A private home care agency director, a sleek woman in her 40s named Melissa Green, barely hid her smirk. A factory-led caregiving service, she said, sipping her latte. You really think people will trust you with their families? Maria kept her face calm, controlled. She had spent years in union negotiations. She knew how to deal with corporate condescension. We think families deserve caregivers who actually care. Not underpaid employees working for profit-hungry agencies. Melissa raised an eyebrow. And you can guarantee quality? Maria's jaw tightened. We're trained. We're committed. And unlike you, we're not doing this to make executives richer. Melissa leaned forward, smirking. Then let the market decide. Maria walked out with Teresa, fire in her chest. She doesn't take us seriously, Teresa muttered. Maria exhaled, her pulse steady. Then let's make her. They started with nothing. No office. No budget. Just a handful of workers, a website, and faith in each other. Then, their first client came through word of mouth. A retired veteran, Mr. Holloway, whose daughter had been laid off from the same factory. She trusted Maria and Teresa. You helped my family for years, she said. I'd rather my dad be with people who understand hard work than some corporate agency that sees him as a number. Maria's throat tightened. This was bigger than a job. This was about dignity. Their first week was rough. The schedule was chaotic. The pay barely covered expenses. But they were doing it. And word spread. Former coworkers told their neighbors. Clients told their friends. Within a month, they had 10 clients. Within 3 months, they had a waiting list. And then, the call came. From Rick Dawson. Maria stared at his name on the screen, shocked. She picked up. Maria, Rick said. It's been a while. Her grip tightened on the phone. What do you need, Rick? He hesitated. We're working on an economic recovery program. There's an opportunity for local businesses to partner with us. Maria cut him off. You need caregivers, don't you? A long pause. Yes. She smiled, slow and steady. Send me the contract. She had built something they couldn't ignore. And this time? She wasn't asking for a job. She was creating them. Maria sat at the worn wooden desk in their new office, a modest, repurposed space in a community center. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. The hum of quiet voices filled the air. Caregivers checking schedules. Teresa reviewing intake forms. Their worker-owned cooperative, CareWorks Collective, was officially a registered business. She glanced at the contract from Sterling Corp., Rick Dawson's company. Their old employer. The very people who had thrown her away. Now? They needed her. Maria ran her fingers over the paper, feeling the weight of it. She should have felt vindicated. Triumphant. But instead? She felt something else. This was never about revenge. It was about proving that people like her, workers over 50, caregivers, women discarded by corporations, still had power. And she had. Are we really doing this? Teresa's voice broke her thoughts. Maria smirked. We already did. Teresa shook her head in disbelief. You realize this means we'll be providing care for some of the same executives who never thought twice about us, right? Maria's lips curved into a slow smile. Yeah, she said. And now? They'll have to treat us with respect. She signed the contract. That night, Maria sat at her kitchen table, watching her mother hum softly while folding towels. Elena's condition was getting worse. But for now? She was calm. Present. And because of CareWorks Collective, Maria could afford to have a trained caregiver come in during the day. She didn't have to do this alone anymore. She ran a hand over her face, exhaling deeply. It had taken everything she had, but she had rebuilt her life. And not just for herself. For all the other women who had been told they were too old, too late, too much of a burden. A soft ping broke the quiet. Maria glanced at her phone. An email. From a healthcare organization in another state. Subject: Partnership Opportunity, Expanding Cooperative Care Models. Maria sat up. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. This was about building something bigger than she had ever imagined. She took a breath, steadying herself before clicking open the email. Because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of the future anymore. This isn't just Maria's story. It's the story of millions of women in midlife, women who have given their best years to companies that discard them without a second thought. Women who are forced to choose between financial survival and caring for the people they love. But Maria proved something powerful: being pushed out doesn't mean being powerless. She didn't wait for someone else to give her a chance, she built her own. And in doing so, she created an opportunity for others just like her. So now, we want to hear from you. What do you think about Maria's journey? Should older workers have more opportunities, or is the job market justified in prioritizing younger employees? What would you have done in Maria's place? Comment 2 if you loved this story and 7 if you didn't. Let us know your thoughts, we read every comment. And if you enjoy real-life stories of resilience, second chances, and powerful transformations, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to EN True Tales with Natalie as your storyteller. We bring you new, inspiring videos every day, stories that might just change the way you see the world. Don't miss out, subscribe now, and we'll see you in the next one.